Hi there guys, and welcome to this week's edition of the Wise Crypto Sunday Special with me, your host, Chris Coney. So today I'll be taking you through another cutting edge topic. Today the topic is who is going to own Web3? So let's explore various answers to that question. I'll define all the various terms as we go, but this discussion is going to explore a paradox between three things. The first one is the fact that Web3 development needs funding. We can't expect all this to be built by volunteers. The second thing is that large VC funds, they create a point of centralization. A VC fund is venture capital. And then the third one is, how can we still make money as individual investors? That's the thing that we really want to keep in mind here. That's the whole purpose of doing this. So you know by now how this works. To make sure your understanding is thorough, we'll start general and then I'll go specific. So let's lay down the very basics here. When we say Web3, what do we mean? Well, Web 1 was known as the static web. That's more akin to a traditional broadcast media, where a major media company would just simply see it as a new way to distribute their content, right? Just a new media. TV, radio, internet. That's very much the way they saw it. It was still very much a monologue. The major media companies created the content and then just broadcasted it to the masses. And they were just the consumers. Web 2, which is the sort of web we're on now, moving into Web 3, but Web 2 was the interactive web, which consists of a somewhat co-creative process between vendor and user. We used to actually formally refer to this as user-generated content. So Facebook, for example, it contains mostly user-generated content, but you can also post links to professionally generated content from, say, an external blog or something that's created by a media company, like a video. The comments section, actually, at the end of most news articles, that would be considered user-generated content because the people writing those comments, they're effectively adding additional content to the same page that the article appears on. So those comments are content. And when Google indexes that page, yes, it will index the whole article text, but it will also index the comments and treat it as one big piece of content. So users can also actually challenge the content in the article by placing a comment, which other users can then read. So Web3 is all that stuff, but decentralized. So Web3 is referred to as the decentralized web. And it's yet another step away from Web 1, where the web was just seen as a traditional broadcast media by large corporations, and those corporations had traditional ownership structures. So Web 2 is still largely powered by large corporations, but the difference is that with Web 2, two elements of their control started to slip away. The first one was the monopoly on the creation of the content, since users could add and even challenge what was posted in the content by posting comments. And then the other one was that the web provided this billion-dollar infrastructure for anyone to use. So startups and all kinds of scrappy innovators could use this billion-dollar infrastructure to do things that competed with these large corporations. So it didn't require masses of funding to get off the ground. Everyone could just experiment with this billion-dollar infrastructure that was provided. Now, the flaw in the Web 2 model is that many big tech companies who run the web today became that way because they bought out a lot of scrappy startups and then just started centralizing power under one umbrella. The holding company of Google is called Alphabet Inc. So that's the overarching holding company that owns Google and all the other companies in the group. So investors made money off of the Web 2 model by either privately funding startups, that's the VC thing, or by investing in the company's IPOs, like Google and so on. So that's just a quick bit of backstory. What's starting to rumble now, though, is this conversation about who's going to own Web 3. If it's going to be decentralized, how can that be? How can you have a decentralized system if you have a bunch of early investors controlling the shares and then making the decisions? It's that old adage that I quote quite a lot, which is, it goes, whoever pays the piper calls the tune, meaning any given organization is accountable to whoever pays them. For Facebook, that would be shareholders and advertisers and not the users. And I'm not just talking about Facebook here. This is the same for all the big tech companies, really. And I'm not even saying there's any evil intent here either. It's simply a function of the system that exists and the incentive structure that exists right now. The joker in the pack here seems to be Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, because he keeps talking about funding things like a decentralized open source social network. He also talks about things like building innovations on top of Bitcoin and so on. And that's leading people to question, like, how can a Silicon Valley CEO funnel research and development funds into a new infrastructure that makes people like him and his investors less powerful? So VC funds have always been a big deal when it comes to tech startups, and everyone knows that, right? It's traditionally been considered a kind of high risk, high reward play because, hell, you might end up with a share in the next Google. And all you have to do is put your money in a VC fund and then let the VC experts find the next unicorn company. With Web3 though, the VC fund is being totally reimagined using crypto and blockchain technology. Now, depending on how long you've been in crypto, you may or may not have heard of the DAO, which was the first major attempt to create a decentralized VC fund. The short version of this story is basically this. $150 million was invested using the Ethereum network. It was put into a smart contract that would act as this decentralized VC fund. And a hacker exploited a flaw in the code and started draining the money out of this smart contract. And that ultimately led to Ethereum splitting into two different networks, Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So Ethereum Classic is the original version of Ethereum, which has the flaw and the so-called theft intact. Because in that network, the belief system is code is law. And then the Ethereum network, the major one that we have today, that's the version of Ethereum that was rolled back to before the DAO was drained, because that was the only way to recover everybody's money. But that kind of goes against the thesis of the principles of blockchain technology, where every block depends on the one that came before and is immutable. I mean, it's the only time that's ever happened, but that was the history of it. So that thing, the DAO, it never even got off the ground. It was just too early, I suppose. The idea, though, was to pool everyone's money into this decentralized VC fund and then make investments and share the profits, rather than all those individual investors just doing their own thing. The concept isn't new because it's a VC fund. There are investment clubs all over the world where people get together and do this. But the innovation with the DAO was it was done with a smart contract. And this concept is now back with a vengeance. And many years later, like 5 odd years later. So this is likely going to be the answer to the question of who's going to own Web3. The answer is we are, you and I. The DAO really was a silly name for a project. The reason it's a silly name is because DAO, D-A-O, that's actually an abbreviation of Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So DAO is a term used to describe a type of organization rather than one specific organization. That's like calling your organization the private company. Anyway, DAOs have sprung up all over the crypto world now, and they're used to make ownership and governance, not governments, well, they are governments, I suppose, but it makes the governance of these networks truly democratic. And like I said earlier, the idea here is to flatten the power structure of an organization. So power is spread out among the participants, and it's done in such a way that corruption is minimized or eliminated. But really it's about spreading power amongst a large group of people, because that's decentralized, versus if you have a committee of 5 people, that's very centralized. So if a DAO ran YouTube or Facebook, it would be the community who decided on things for the network, like who should be banned from the network, who shouldn't be banned from the network, what content should be allowed on the network, what content isn't allowed on the network. And the rules will all be transparent and agreed. And that's the beauty of blockchain technology. It creates transparency and accountability. You may have even heard of this project called Yield Guild Games. So this is a project that's come up in the Weiss research a number of times. And this is actually a DAO of sorts. And it functions kind of like a VC fund, a decentralized one. And it operates within the online gaming community. The idea behind YGG is to pool investment capital and then invest it in things like NFTs, virtual gaming items, new projects, and even players, like physical human players, are sponsored by YGG. And as you would imagine, there is a YGG token that you can invest in that fluctuates based on the performance of the fund. But as crowdfunding has taught us, the wisdom of the crowd is far greater than any individual or small group. So you would expect the performance of an investment in a DAO like YGG would perform better than you could do yourself. That's the theory anyway. The practice is actually playing out right before our very eyes. Now, last week on the Sunday special, I spoke about the project Bumper. And it was that project that really got me thinking about decentralized VC funds, because Indx Capital was quoted as the original investor in that project. And I looked into it. Turns out Indx, they did a security token offering on the 1st of June 2019, a full 2 years prior to Bumper being created. Now, while that sounds like a step towards one of these Web3 decentralized VC funds, in the Bumper white paper it says this, quote, "Launching on June the 1st, Indx is a private placement token sale aimed at qualified investors in accordance with jurisdictional laws and regulations, priced at 30 cents with a $15 million hard cap." Close quote. So that's still got a flavor of the rich getting richer, I suppose. The problem is that it's kind of a chicken and egg problem regulation. The reason I said that's got a flavor of the rich getting richer is because it specifically says that the token sale is aimed at qualified investors, which cuts out the smaller investors. So the chicken and egg problem of regulation is if you leave it unregulated, then all the smaller investors are given the opportunity. But then you leave it wide open to scammers because there's no quality control. But if you heavily regulate it, it pushes out smaller investors and it makes it harder for those scrappy, innovative startups to blossom. So evolution is never static, and it always has elements of what came before blending in with what's coming next. There's very rarely a very clean line in the sand. So as ever, the advice is invest at your own risk. And while the vehicles of investment are constantly changing, like these decentralized VC funds, the principle of risk and reward going hand in hand hasn't really changed. So take advantage of all the research that Weiss provides and just invest wisely. So that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Weiss Crypto Sunday Special. Keep your eye on your inbox for the next week's episode. But until then, it's me, Chris Coney, saying bye for now.